Data binding provides you with a connection between your user interface and your data. Not only will you retrieve data and display it in controls on a form or a web page, but if you update the data in the UI, then the data in the data table updates as well. There are 3 ways to do data binding with LINQ to dataset. You can use query.toList, you can use copy to data table, and you can use as data view. If you use query.toList, this forces an immediate query evaluation, so the query evaluates, and then you get back a generic list containing the query results. And you can bind to this. You get a read-only display of data, so you can't make changes, but this is a quick and easy way to display information. So you want to show the orders for a customer, or you just want to show customers who have placed orders in a particular city. Query to list is fairly quick. But if you want to make changes to the data, you'll need to use one of the other 2 techniques. So copy to data table will copy the results of a query into a data table. Now this only works if your query returns a collection of data rows. So this works great with a LINQ to dataset query, a LINQ to SQL query, a LINQ to entities query. It works also great if you're starting from a data table. It does not work with a LINQ to XML or a LINQ to objects query because those do not return data rows. So you take the query, copy it to a data table, and then you can bind the UI to that data table. And if you want to save the changes back, then you need to merge the data in this data table copy back into the original data table so that you can then call the update method of a data adapter or a table adapter. The third way is to use query.asDataView, and we just saw this in the previous demo. This creates a data view based on the query results. And again, this requires the query to return data rows. You then bind the UI to the data view. This gives you automatic two-way data binding as well as the filtering and the sorting and the finding that we saw in the previous section. And this is actually the preferred approach to data binding for a couple reasons. One, it's faster and easier than using copy to data table. And it's more efficient since there's only one copy of the data. Obviously, copy to data table makes a copy of the data. So you now have your data in the results set. You also have it copied to a data table. So using as data view is faster. It's also easier because there's less code to write. Let's go see examples of data binding with all three of these methods. I'm back in the LINQ to Dataset sample application, and this time I want to look at the Windows application and see some examples of data binding using LINQ to Dataset. So let's run this. And first, let's look at working with untyped datasets. Let me show you the form. The untyped dataset form has a button to view beverages, a button to see condiments, and then a button to save those condiments. Okay, and when the form loads, I'm going to create a connection to the Northwind database on SQL Server. And I'm going to create a new dataset first called nwind dataset. So now this connection is a connection to Northwind. And then I'm going to create a products data adapter. This is an instance of the SQL data adapter class. And I'll pass in the SQL statements, select everything from the products table, as well as the connection. So the products data adapter has a select command. Now I'm going to set its update command to this. This is the SQL statement that will save information back to the products table. And so all of this information, as well as the original product ID, are parameters to that update command. So I now need to set those. So I now need to create those parameters. So I'll add a new parameter called product name, which is nvarchar. It's an input parameter. It's named product name. Bunch of other arguments in here. I just copied this code from the code that Visual Studio generated and then made a couple changes to fit here. So I'm going to create each of the parameters. There's a bunch of them. Let's run down to here. Then I'll call the fill method of this products data adapter and fill out the products table in the data set. And then because this is an untyped data set, the way I refer to tables is dataset.tables and then specify the table name. So I'll just create this products variable, which is an instance of data table, and that will let me refer to the products table. So let's look at this. Using the dataset visualizer, it's a table, and here's the products. Okay. So that's all done to bring down products to the local client so that I can now query the products data inside the dataset. So when I click Beverages, I'm going to run a query. Query is named Beverages from product in products.asEnumerable. And again, I use the asEnumerable to reference the table and the generic field accessor to reference the category ID, which I want to be equal to 1, and the product name and the unit price. I'm going to bring back from the products table product name and unit price for anything in category 1. Then I want to see that data. So on the form I have a grid, and I'm going to set its data source to beverages.toList. The toList method of the query not only immediately executes the query, but it brings back a generic list, and I can display that in the grid. So here are the beverages. Now this is read-only data, so I can't make any changes to this. So it's not necessarily good if I want to edit data, but for running a query and displaying the data, that's pretty fast. Now when I click Condiments, I want a list that I can actually edit. So it's pretty much the same type of query from products and products as enumerable, where category ID is 2. And now what I want to do is bind to this query. So I'm going to use the copy to data table method to copy the contents of the query to queried products, which is a data table. And it's a data table that contains the condiments that are products in category 2. Then I'm going to add this to the data set and then set the data source property of the grid to this table. I want to automatically resize the column so I can see all the data, and I want to freeze column 2. Column 2 is the product name, and the reason I freeze that is so that when I scroll to the right, I still always see the product ID and the product name. Now, because I'm binding to a data table, that means I can actually make changes here. So I'm going to change this product name to aniseed syrup light, and then save these changes. Now when I click Save, I'm ultimately going to want to call the update method on the products data adapter, but before I can do that, I need to do a couple of things. One is I need to get the changes back into the original products table, because the products data adapter is not based on queried products, it's based on the products table. So I want to call the merge method of the products table and merge the contents of queried products back into that. Now before I do that, I need to set the primary key. Because I'm working with an untyped data set, queried products does not have a primary key. And you can't merge a table without a primary key into a table that has a primary key. I learned this the hard way as I was writing this example. So I'm going to set the primary key of the queried products table to product ID, and then I can do the merge. Now again, the reason I need to do the merge is because queried products has product number 3, which is aniseed syrup light. The products table has a product 3, which is aniseed syrup. So after I do the merge, now the change has been made in the products table, and now when I call the update method of the products data adapter, that change will be sent back to the database. Let's go prove this. Let's go into the Server Explorer, connect to Northwind, and see the products table data. Here's aniseed syrup light. So to save the changes, I need to set the primary key, then do a merge, then call update. And to do querying, I need to use asEnumerable and the generic field accessor. Okay, let's close this, and let's see how life is easier when I use a typed data set. I still have the beverages button, I still have condiments and save, but now I have a confections button and the ability to save those. And then I have radio buttons for sorting and filtering. So when I click beverages, let's see what happens. Well, first, when the form loaded, I used the products table adapter, and I called the fill method. That brings down the products, and so the products table in the data set contains the same products as the products table in the database. Now I want to see beverages. And again, because I'm using a typed data set, my query uses the familiar syntax from product in dataset.products, where product.categoryID equals to 1. And I don't have to worry about the asEnumerable or the generic field accessor. So I run the query, and then I set the data source of the grid to beverages to list, just like I did in the previous version. And this again is read-only data. When I call condiments, I'm going to run the similar query. This time get products in category 2. I'm once again going to copy to a table named queried products. I'm going to clean out the data source and then set the data source to queried products. This line where I set the data source to null, I added that because I found that if I went back and forth from beverages to condiments and back again, that the data didn't always display properly in the grid. So I'm going to clear out the data source and then set it to queried products. Then auto resize the columns and freeze column 2. So here are the condiments. And again, I can make changes to this. I'll set this back to aniseed syrup and click Save. Now here, I don't need to take anywhere near as many steps. I don't need to set the primary key in the queried products table because it already has one. And the reason it has one is because I'm using a typed data set. So I could have used the merge like I did before, products.merge, passing queried products, but there's another way I can do this. I can actually use copy to data table. So I used copy to data table to get the query results into this queried products data table. I can use copy to data table to copy those back to products. To do that, I need to go back to using asEnumerable, and then I specify where I want queried products to go into the products table, and then there's an additional argument. So this is load option dot, and there's 3 choices: overwrite changes, preserve changes, or upsert. And yes, that's not a typo. Upsert is a combination of update and insert. So what does overwrite changes do? The incoming values for this row will be written to both the current value and the original value versions of the data. So in other words, I'm going to take the contents of queried products and replace everything in products. The problem with that is I can't then save the changes because the update method of the products table adapter assumes that data's been changed. The second option is to preserve changes. The incoming values for this row are written to the original value, and the current version of the data in each column will not be changed. Well, this is kind of the opposite of what I want because I'm sending changes to the products table. I don't want the data I'm sending to be the new original value, and for the current version not to be changed. I want actually the opposite. So I'm going to use upsert. The incoming values for this row are written to the current version of each column, and the original version will not be changed. So what I'm going to do is, for the queried products table, which is now aniseed syrup, I want this to be the new current value, and so here's the products table. I want this to be the original value and aniseed syrup to be the new value. Let's just nuke that and go back. There we go. So now I'm going to do this copy to data table. And now if we look inside products, I've made the change to aniseed syrup. And now I can call the update on the products table adapter and send that change back to the Northwind database. Again, let's double check. Open up the table in the database, and the change has been made. Let's look at confections. And here I'm going to run a query to retrieve category 3, and then I'm going to create a data view off that query. So confections.asDataView, and I'll call that data view, and I'm going to clear out the data source of the grid and bind the grid to that. And now the grid contains condiments. So let's make a change. Let's change this to Pavlova dog and save. And now all I have to do is call the update, because the data view is a live view of data, and it's a live view not only back to the query, but actually back to the original products table. So if I now looked at the products table, let's go back to, where do I have a reference to the products table? Here. Is this going to work? Yep. So that was category 3, Pavlova dog. That change, when I made it in the view, went all the way back to the products table, so all I need to do is call the update method of the products table adapter. And now because I have a view, I can do sorting and filtering. So let's sort by unit price. And so what I'll do is set the sort property of the view to unit price. And now this is sorted by price. We can also sort by units in stock. And units on order. I can also do filtering. So I'll select high price, and I'll set the row filter property of the view to category ID equals 3 and unit price greater than or equal to 50. Well, the unit price greater than or equal to 50, that's very understandable, but why do I also have category ID equals 3 in there? Isn't that redundant? Because remember, my original query said bring back products in category 3. Well, it turns out that when you set both the sort and the row filter property of the view, that overrides any sorting or filtering you had in the original query. So if I set this row filter to unit price greater than or equal to 50, that would basically change the where clause of my query to where unit price greater than 50. And what I would wind up with in my grid is products in all categories, but only those that cost more than $50. So if I want to continue to only see confections, then I have to add the category ID equals 3 into the row filter. So here are confections with a high price, confections that are low in stock, and confections that have high number of units on order. So what you've seen in this demo is how to use LINQ to dataset in a Windows application, and specifically how to bind to data using LINQ to dataset.